in this lesson what we're going to do is move on away from liberalism and start to look at the origins of conservatism as a political ideology. We're going to outline really where conservatism came from, the basic ideas of what conservatism is all about, and then in the next lesson we're going to start to look at the key tenets of conservatism, the idea of the state and the idea of conservative economics and conservative society, etc., etc. So, as an introduction, we should note that conservatism exists almost as a reaction to radical political change. Okay, so it's a reaction to political change, and this is why it's given often given the title of being reactionary. Reactionary. So, the idea of conservatism is where we have political change and political revolution, the idea of radical political change. Conservatism is the idea that one wants to conserve the ideas that that came before this radical change, and it really came out of the revolutions of Europe, and really as a response to the revolutions of Europe. So we could talk about things like the French Revolution and the English Revolution, are the two specific ones we're going to mention. So it has its origins in the revolutions of Europe, mainly within the French Revolution. It came about as a reaction to the French Revolution. Okay, and we are going to mention very briefly the English Revolution in a minute, which predates the French Revolution, and this is because we're going to be talking about Thomas Hobbes. We should be noted that Thomas Hobbes wasn't a conservative. Okay, he just had because conservatism didn't really exist at that point. It was the concept of conservatism was taking shape around the French Revolution, and Thomas Hobbes had already died at that point. The point of talking about Thomas Hobbes is his ideas are can be linked quite tangentially to the concept of conservatism. Conservatism almost came built out of some of Hobbesian political philosophy. So the French Revolution, and namely a reaction to the French Revolution. So a reaction to the French Revolution. Of course, the French Revolution was the purpose of the revolution was to replace the French monarchy and to instate a written constitution with quite liberal ideas. So this was seen as a triumph of liberalism. And therefore, the conservative movement began to promote the ideas of change to conserve. According to the thinker Edmund Burke, a state without the means of some change is without the means of its conservation. So we're talking about the conserving of original ideas, the conserving of ideas in response to radical political change, because the French Revolution, of course, was a very radical political change. Okay, this is opposed to the concept of liberal thinkers, because within the conservative viewpoint, the concept of human nature is very limited and flawed. This comes out when we're talking about Thomas Hobbes. So Thomas Hobbes, when he viewed human nature, he took a very skeptical view of human nature, and we can understand this when we talk about his view of the state of nature. So the state before, the state, a time before the state. So time before a state, or a stateless society. A stateless society. Now, we have a lesson on Thomas Hobbes's state of nature already as part of just a general political philosophy class, so I'll link that in the description below. But we're just going to overview Thomas Hobbes very, very quickly in this lesson. But if you want a lot more detail about as we go, and we'll go in and we pick out some real key quotes from his book Leviathan, if you want to see that, then there is a video for that on this channel already. But Thomas Hobbes, as we already mentioned, was a political philosopher, a political theorist, okay, and he was writing in response to the Civil War. So Thomas Hobbes actually lived for a very, very long time. I believe he lived until he was into his 80s, which for the 1600s obviously was a very long time. And he lived through the Civil War. So he lived through the English Civil War. the English Civil War. Civil War. And as such, you can obviously imagine that his theories and political concepts are informed by the fact that he lived through a period in English history of particular turmoil and revolutionary change. So as such, his viewpoint, the lens in which he describes his political thoughts, can be seen as a response to the English Civil War. The English Civil War taking place between 1642 and 1651. And so, therefore, he argued against the concept of a state of nature. Okay, the state of nature being a stateless society. So, stateless society. Okay, we already know the key quote from his work Leviathan, which is that life in the state of nature, life in a world without any kind of formal hierarchical structure, i.e. a state, okay, would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And there's a very long quote as well. This is the last part of a very big paragraph of things that would go wrong in a state of nature. And again, if you want to go through that, if you want to see me go through that, go and watch that video on the state of nature on the channel. But his viewpoint of the concept of human nature and human nature's ability to for us to all live together is very, very negative. He doesn't believe that in a state of nature we would have equal treatment and equal opportunity and all these things. That he thought a state, a monarchical state specifically, would be needed to be put in place to resolve these issues. He argued that Hobbes, the state of nature, would be similar to a state of war due to individuals' selfish desires for power. So we can understand Hobbes's view as a kind of pre-conservative idea. Okay, so as we should mention and make clear that Thomas Hobbes wasn't a conservative, because conservatism didn't exist when Thomas Hobbes was writing, but what Thomas Hobbes' writing can show us is really a kind of early idea of what conservatism was going to eventually look like when we look at the likes of people like Edmund Burke, who were writing in response to the French Revolution. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk about what human nature, what society, what the economy, and what the state would look like in a conservative framework. And all we've done in this lesson is just take a look at the origins of conservatism, the basic concept of conservatism as a reactionary policy, as a reactionary ideology, something that it reacts and it is in response to radical political change.